Good evening. Now, I normally have a little notification that pops up on my screen that says your event is live, and I've had no such notification, so I'm hoping the event is live. Nonetheless, we've already got people pouring into our our virtual auditorium. Good evening to the 56 people who've joined us so far, and welcome to all those who are still joining us. My name's Nick, and I am here on behalf of Norfolk Wildlife Trust, but unusually those who attend regularly will see that I'm not in my home in Norfolk. I have spent a wonderful day on Northumberland Wildlife Trust reserves today, and I'm rushing back from the field to host this event with the wonderful Kate Bradbury. Kate, joining us from home?
From home, yes, from home.
Lovely to have you with us. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm very well. I'm very glad we've had some rain.
Yes. Oh, you've had rain, have you, up here in Northumberland?
We've had so much rain.
Have you?
Amazing.
Excellent. Excellent. The joy of a true wildlife gardener in your face there. So we'll come back to Kate in just a second, and she, of course, is what we're here to talk about and to whom we're here to talk to this evening. But there are a few things I have to say before we start. You will have questions, no doubt, for Kate, and if you would like to ask Kate a question, please do pop the question in the Q&A box, which is enabled. I probably won't be able to ask Kate all of your questions. For some of them, I'll read them aloud. Some of them I'll notify you that we're going to try and bring you into the conversation, and you'll get a little flag to tell you that, and we'll try to do that. So please, if you have a question for Kate, pop them in the Q&A box. Also, there's a chat box, and David will be popping one or two bits of information, and the first one he's going to pop in there is a link to the possibility, should you be so moved, to make a donation to Norfolk Wildlife Trust. This is a free event. Nobody's obliged to make any kind of donation, and we're delighted to have you with us wherever you're joining us from and whoever you are. However, should you wish to help us by making a donation, David will pop a link in the chat which will enable you so to do. But even more importantly, he will pop a link to the Wild Sounds and Books website. And by going on that link, you'll be able to purchase Kate's brand new, exciting, wonderful book, How to Create a Wildlife Pond. And not only that, but actually through the same link, you'll be able to find out about Kate's other books, which we'll also be talking about shortly. Now, Wild Sounds and Books are our wonderful friends and supporters who stock all of our visitor centres, and they are great supporters of wildlife conservation who donate money all over the world to wonderful causes, helping birds and helping wildlife. And so we're delighted to work in partnership with them. Should you wish to purchase Kate's book, and if you don't wish to purchase Kate's book, you jolly well ought to, frankly. Should you wish to purchase Kate's book, please follow the link to do so through Wild Sounds and Books, and by so doing, you'll make a donation also to Norfolk Wildlife Trust. Thank you very much indeed. And while I'm saying thanks, for about a year now, I've been asking people to make donations towards our Thompson Common appeal. And we've been appealing for the money we needed to buy a large amount of land around the edge of our fabulous Thompson Common Reserve. And I am extremely delighted to say that we've reached our target, and we are now in the process of purchasing said land, meaning we can extend Thompson Common, we can restore ancient grassland that had been lost to agriculture. We can restore ancient ponds, the pingos that have been lost. And so this is a big victory for wildlife. And it is thanks to you who have donated. And so we are extremely grateful to you. Now, Cley Calling, as you will know, is an ongoing series of events, and we do one a month, but we also have festivals. And the next Cley Calling Festival takes place from the 15th to the 18th of July. Some of the events are actual real live events. Who'd have thought it, eh? And some of them are online events, and I encourage you all to find out about them at our special dedicated website, which is cleycalling.com. And David's just popped a link to that in the chat. He's ever so good, is our David, who is masterminding all of the technology behind the scenes from his home in Norfolk. Now, on the subject of technology, while David and I were in the green room a moment ago, because I'm in a hotel in Northumberland, nothing wrong with Northumberland Wi-Fi, of course, but there was a little bit of a glitch and I hung up for a moment. Should that happen, Kate has promised to juggle and do her one-woman version of The Sound of Music for as long as it takes for me to come back, and is going to entertain you, and I'll soon be back. If the whole thing should hang up, which is unlikely because it's my problem and not David's, who's the host, come back in through the same link. Kate, I'm awfully sorry for talking so very long. all things that needed saying. But we're here to talk about how to create a wildlife pond.
We are.
Ponds are terribly, terribly important. And one of the reasons that, to start with the sad stuff, is that we've lost the vast majority of ponds. So tell us about ponds in the British landscape.
Ponds in the British landscape, I mean, they're really important. They provide homes for wildlife, they provide water for wildlife, they provide food for wildlife. Pretty much they're all things to all things, really. And as you say, we've lost huge amounts. I think it's something around like 90% in some areas. So we've lost these wild ponds. Ponds in farmland tend to be degraded. They're not sort of at the quality they were before, and obviously with intensification of agriculture and progress, things like where you would have a cattle pond in the corner of a field, you now would perhaps have a trough that sort of fills up from mains water or whatever. So in the wild and in the wider countryside, we're losing both the quality and the quantity of our ponds, and that is resulting in a very sad decline in wildlife. And studies have shown that with the existing ponds, because there are fewer of them, you have lower diversity of species. So yes, it is caused very sad. But there's 220 million gardens in the UK or in the British Isles. And I don't know, maybe we could all put a pond in them, and then we'd have.
How about we sell 220 million copies of your book?
I would love that.
And then we could have a pond in every garden in the UK. But as you rightly say, ponds have declined. And in many areas, particularly in lowland England, they've declined by 90%. Because, of course, there was a pond, as you rightly say. Fields weren't just used in the past. Before nitrate fertilizers, a field would be in grass for a couple of years, then it would be cropped, then it would be something else. And there was always a pond in the corner where the livestock would drink, whether it was the horses who were ploughing or the cattle or sheep who lived there. And, of course, that was also the pond where the hedgehogs drank and the turtle doves drank, and where the newts bred and the frogs bred and the toads bred and everybody bred. Toads, absolutely. And so ponds have declined enormously because with the ripping out of the hedges to make bigger fields, with the introduction of enormous tractors and so on, 90% of ponds in much of lowland Britain have been lost, which makes them doubly more important. But they have enormous potential. Now, we touched on this already, but in How to Create a Wildlife Pond, you say, a pond is the center of your garden. It's life, it's fun, it's where you'll be drawn to as you wander around, where you will sit and contemplate the world. It's where you will spot things you've never seen before. And then a little further on in the book, a pond will be the most biodiverse part of your garden, often within weeks of you digging it, and it's difficult to overestimate the importance of ponds for wildlife. Just tell us a little bit about what you have in your own ponds, however many ponds you're now at.
I've got 3 ponds. My most.
A 3-pond woman.
I'm a 3-pond woman.
You look like.
Yeah, I'd like to be a 4-pond woman. I'm getting onto that. So my ponds. So the one in the back garden is the biggest. And I made it as, I've just got a 40-foot garden. It's like a little Victorian terrace in Portslade near Brighton. Not very glamorous, but I've got this huge pond in the middle of the garden, which all my neighbours laugh at. But I wanted a big pond because when I bought the house, I asked the existing owner if she'd had frogs or toads in the garden, and she'd seen toads, and toads seem to prefer, or we're led to believe they prefer bigger ponds. And so I wanted as big a pond as possible because I wanted to get toads in. And what have I got? I've got all these beetles. I mean, it's really, I've got my book out, and I've done lots of ID of the different species, but there's so many things in there. these things turned up the other day that I haven't had a chance to sort of work out what they are, like these tiny little sort of orangey red beetles that zip around. I've got these little brown beetles that zip around. I've got back swimmers. Back swimmers lay eggs in the pond every year. So I have these little back swimmer nymphs that just grow, and I watch them develop every year. I don't have pond skaters, which is really weird, but I have them on my allotment pond, so that's okay. All is restored. I guess they just don't like my garden ponds. And I think that's my favourite thing about ponds. They're all different. What else do I get? I get common darter dragonflies. I get common blue damselflies. Obviously loads of bird life. The hedgehogs drink from the pond. The foxes drink from the pond. I had my first frog spawn this year, and I had, I reckon, about 30 blobs. I stopped counting at 30. It was just obscene, the amount of frog spawn I had, and I don't know where the frogs came from, because the pond's only 2 years old, but presumably neighbouring gardens, which is how it works. Yeah, I've just got loads of stuff, and more stuff comes in every day. So, well, every week. So it's in its 3rd year now, and I'm just watching it grow. And every day is different. It's wonderful.
Magnificent. And do you feel like a heroine for having enabled this habitat for these wonderful creatures with whom you share your life?
I don't feel like a heroine, no.
You should. You should.
That's very kind. I feel like, I don't know, I'm sort of reliving my childhood, and I'm just really lucky that I can just go out whenever I want, work permitting, and sit by my pond. I've put a bench by my pond, I've got cushions on my bench, I've got the whole thing set up, so I can just sit and hang out by my pond and just look in it and just see what's going on. And yeah, it's great. I love it.
Fantastic, fantastic. I have a small confession here, which is that I have 2 tiny sink ponds in my garden. And the reason I have 2 tiny sink ponds is because my front door, the end of my front garden, literally is step out onto the village duck pond. And the village duck pond is covered in mallards. Now, I've done a little bit of sneaky planting of yellow flag irises around the edge and hemp agrimony and things when nobody from the parish council is looking. I hope nobody from the parish council is watching this evening. I've gone round and rewilded the edges a bit, but with 80 ducks in my front garden, I can't have a wildlife pond because they trash it. So I have to have very small, discreet ponds. But your book touches on all of that. It touches on big ponds, square ponds, deep ponds, shallow ponds, and how they work. So just talk, because now to get to the nitty gritty, don't give too much away. Spoiler alert, you need to buy Kate's book to get all of the nitty gritty of this. But nonetheless, Kate, give us some technicalities. Tell us what's best for ponds, for wildlife, and for people to enjoy wildlife in their own spaces.
Well, I think what's best is the largest pond that you've got space for, but I don't want to put people off who've got small gardens, which is why I included lots of different pond designs in the book. So yeah, I think the biggest pond you can have just means you can attract, you can create the widest variety of different micro habitats around it. So you can have lots of shallow areas, you can have a deeper area, you can have a little pebble beach, you can have grassy margins, you can have all of those things. And you know, then the smaller the pond gets, then the fewer opportunities you have for those little micro habitats. But that's not to say that like a small container pond, I mean, obviously, you know, you've got 2 sink ponds, they will be attracting lots of wildlife. I've got a sink pond in my front garden, and I get dragonflies breeding in it. I get loads of mosquitoes, and that's midges, and I don't mind them, I like them. And obviously all the local foxes and hedgehogs get to have a little drink from that front garden pond as well. They don't have to come all the way around this sort of network of Victorian alleyways that we have here to get to the back to have a drink. So I think it's really important, even if nothing else comes, you're providing drinking water for mammals, and sparrows absolutely love my front garden pond as well, for both bathing and drinking. And nicking my tadpoles, I've seen them. So yeah, you know, there's loads of stuff you can do with a container pond. I once went around to this man's house, who I think was he was involved in amphibian and reptile conservation, and he had 4 or 5 ponds in his garden. He was like, that's my newt pond, that's my toad pond, these are my frog ponds. He had great crested newts in his garden, which yeah, had their own pond, and he had this amazing sort of trough with a little fountain in it, and he sort of got this ladder, and they were just really happy just climbing up and down this ladder to get into this pond, and yeah, you can do anything, and wildlife will adapt, wildlife will use it.
Indeed, any patch, any little mirror of water that you can provide, whether, as you say, it's a bathing place, but you say the sparrows have been having a tadpole. For a lady with 30 blobs of frog spawn, I reckon you can spare a tadpole or two. I hate to be heartless, but I reckon the sparrows deserve a tadpole or two. Now, the first question that came in was from Tracy Bedwell, and I'm going to answer your question on Kate's behalf, having read her wonderful book. How can we make a pond if we're unable to dig one out, i.e. container type pond? Well, there are so many ideas for container ponds in Kate's book, and I know that's a shallow answer to get you to buy her wonderful book, but all the ideas are just there. How to get them, how to install them, how to plant them, it's all answered in the book. And so that's the really simple answer. Now, I've got another question here from Teresa. Hello, Teresa, I know you. Lovely to have you with us. Will you talk about ponds drying out, please? I managed 2 and they both dry out with no possibility of topping them up. Also, are there pond plants that muntjac don't eat? Muntjac get into the pond to eat new plants. Thank you. So 2 separate questions there from Teresa Mason. Will we talk about ponds drying out, and are there pond plants that muntjac don't eat?
So the muntjac question, I'm going to be really honest, I don't know the answer to that. So apologies, Teresa. I don't know if you do, Nick.
No, I don't, to be honest. My answer, although it's a cop out, is that if it's healthy stuff for a muntjac to eat, then actually it's probably doing a good job for all sorts of other wildlife. And although it's a pain if your yellow flag irises are never yellow and flaggy, nonetheless they are providing food for various things. And so I don't think I would go down the route of trying to create a habitat which the muntjac didn't want to browse in, because the stuff that they browse is probably really good for everybody else. But yeah, let's see if we can answer Teresa's question about ponds drying out.
I mean, ponds drying out in summer is a very natural phenomenon for wild ponds. So natural ponds that form in woodlands and carrs and things like that. That's what happens. And there are some studies that suggest that in ponds that do dry out, frog tadpoles in particular just develop more quickly. So it doesn't necessarily mean death for them. And also because they dry out, it's stopping the life cycle of some of their predators, which can also be advantageous to them. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if they do dry out, although I do appreciate it's extremely frustrating. I mean, are they in your garden, Teresa? Are they natural ponds? Are they ponds that you've created yourself? I kind of would want to know that, really, because if it's a garden pond, then you can do some sort of excavation work to, line it and make sure it doesn't dry out. But if it's a natural pond and that's what's happening, I'd just be inclined to just let it be, really.
I would definitely agree there with Kate about the drying out, if it's a natural sort of pond, because for many species, and Kate touched on the natural predators being knocked out by the drying out. But for example, our natterjack ponds, in the case of Norfolk Wildlife Trust home dunes, if fish and common toads and common frogs were able to carry on with their life cycles, the poor little natterjacks would have nowhere to live. So ephemeral ponds, to make myself sound terribly clever, are actually really good for a different sort of wildlife. So you may be flying the flag for a different set of species. And the same with, I mentioned our Thompson Common Reserve in the Brecks. Some of the pingos there dry out seasonally, so they are very, very important for species that need that diapause. They need that break in their life cycle, which knocks other things on the head. So if they are natural ponds, Teresa, as Kate says, it's really quite a good thing. I think while we're talking about the technicalities of ponds, David, can we bring in Acheson Norman, who's got quite a long question, so it's best she asks it. And there's one little bit at the end about Norfolk, and I'll answer that bit, Kate, because that's possibly beyond her experience. Acheson, good evening. Where are you joining us from, Acheson?
Hello, I'm from Galveston in South Norfolk.
Ah, hello. Well, welcome. And what's your question for Kate, please?
So I've got two ponds actually on the site of an old farm pond. And when we moved in 30 years ago, it was obviously somebody had kind of scraped out whatever lining had been there. So we remade those ponds with an old swimming pool butyl lining that we acquired from somewhere. I reckon that lining's about 50 years old now.
Wow.
And it's leaking. It didn't help that the mole dug through it the year before last. And we have patched it, but realistically, it has come to the end of its life. The pond is absolutely full of wildlife. Occasionally the marshes overtop and we actually get it flooded, so it gets reseeded with stuff. So this year we've got sticklebacks in it. That's been fun. And at the moment the water soldier is beautifully in bloom and the frog bit is lovely, and we have dragonfly varieties, all sorts of variety and all kinds of things. So I know that the best time to redo the pond would be the winter, but I also know that because they're both quite large, that if we just empty it out, I mean, how do we empty it out without losing all of that? So it's kind of a real dilemma, isn't it, about what we do?
It is. Okay, I will attempt to answer this because it is a huge dilemma. I mean, you say you've got two ponds. Could you do one at a time? Because I mean, you would. I mean, it's not really advised to move life from one pond into another pond because there's the risk of spreading disease. But if, for example, they were close together, then that wouldn't really be an issue. I don't know if Nick would agree with me on that one. Also, I mean, really, in order to sort of replace the lining, you could just arm yourself with 100 buckets. I don't know how big this pond is, and not actually get rid of the wildlife, not empty it, but just keep everything in buckets. Keep the water in buckets, keep the plants in buckets. You could keep some of the sludge even, because in winter lots of things sort of bury themselves into the sludge, so there will be things living in that as well, although it does stink, so I would keep it in a bucket quite far from the house, and yeah, reline it and then get everything back in as quickly as you can, really. There's no really sort of nice way to dress it up. Things are going to be disturbed and you probably won't be able to save everything, but I would, if it was my pond, I would just go and buy as many buckets as I needed and just set to it on a weekend and try and limit as much damage as possible while knowing that I was, fixing the pond in the long term. I don't know if Nick agrees with that.
I do, Kate. Well, you're the expert, but I do completely agree with you that definitely to do one of the ponds and then the other of the ponds so that species can move between the two. Another thing you can do is when you're pulling stuff out, stuff that has to be sacrificed, leave it piled up at the side of the pond for a day or so, and then anything that, because all these beetles and so on can smell where water is, that's how they move between ponds, and they will go back into where there is water. So if you put vegetation from the pond that you're emptying not too far away from the pond that's still there, they may well move of their own accord. So as Kate rightly says, not every individual creature will necessarily survive, but you will still have a lot of life that will quickly get established again, which in biodiversity terms is really the point. And you asked, Alison, about who in Norfolk would give advice. Our friends at Natural Surroundings in North Norfolk on the Bayfield estate, and they really are super expert and experienced about creating space for wildlife in gardens. Natural Surroundings on the Bayfield estate, and great friends also of Norfolk Wildlife Trust. And you've had a response from Teresa here, which is lovely, Kate. She says they're dugout ponds, and I like both answers. Great, I will be more relaxed about them now. You can add ephemeral ponds to your wildlife vocabulary and feel very proud of it. You just say, oh yes, my ponds are ephemeral. They're terribly good for wildlife that needs ephemeral ponds. Now, I think let's bring in Harriet Thomas as well, who has an interesting question about species living together. David, are we able to bring in Harriet Thomas, please? So there we are. Hello, Harriet. Hello, Harriet.
Hello, thanks very much. We'd love to have some frogs and toads, but we have a grass snake. and the two don't seem to be able to live together. We never have frog spawn. We have two large ponds and a very tiny formal pool, one of which is a wildlife pond, the other has fish in, but they don't seem to be able to come. Is there anything we can do to attract them?
Oh, I wouldn't have thought the grass snake would be putting off the frogs and toads to the degree that they wouldn't spawn in there. I would think that they're not spawning in there for perhaps other reasons. Without seeing those ponds, I wouldn't really want to speculate. I mean, it could just be that they've got a really, really lovely pond around the corner that they really like to spawn in. Toads, as I'm sure you know, tend to be more faithful to ancestral sites than frogs. Frogs tend to be more opportunist. They will spawn in puddles in very wet springs, but they do like spawning in very shallow water. So I know you say you've got large ponds. Have those ponds got significant sort of shallow areas around the edges that they can spawn in, because the shallow water warms up more quickly in spring. And they quite like that, and it needs morning sun as well. So any frost and things like that is sort of quickly dispensed with when the sun comes out. So yeah, I mean, that sort of sounds quite surprising, really. I mean, I'd keep plugging away and see what you can do. I mean, you know, have you seen frogs and toads in the garden? Are they coming in? You know, or is it just are they just not there? Or you know, or is there a really good, lovely pond nearby that they're just sort of snubbing yours in favour of?
And if I can add, Harriet, looking at it the other way, many wildlife gardeners in the country, they are happy, of course, to have frogs in their garden pond, but dream of having a grass snake. And if you read our wonderful friend Patrick Barkham's book, Wild Child, a grass snake in the garden pond, their little garden pond, is an absolute highlight of the children's lives. And not only is it amazing and wonderful to have grass snake, but it's actually also an incredible sign of the health, because a grass snake in a pond terms is an apex predator, really. It's right up there with pike. Don't put pike in your pond, but especially if you've got a liner, those teeth. But grass snakes are the hunters of things like fish, small fish, and frogs and toads. And the fact that you've got grass snakes visiting means that your pond is part of, at least, a landscape that is capable of supporting grass snakes. And so that really means there's nothing wrong with your pond, and because you've got this incredible predator, which in the same way as if I see a sparrowhawk over a wood, I know there are lots and lots of blue tits. And so to see that there's a grass snake means that there's lots of food, because they couldn't survive otherwise. So it's a shame you don't have the lovely croaking of frogs in your pond, but at the same time, it's great that you've got a grass snake. That's what I'd say, definitely. Right, Kate, let's move on to gardens more broadly, because of course you have written a book on gardening for wildlife, and it is your métier to communicate with us all about how important gardens are for wildlife, but how important also gardening for wildlife can be for ourselves, and you do it gloriously and wonderfully. Oh no, actually, before I do that, I need to challenge you on something. Well, it's not quite challenging. I love this because you've just written a book that's all about how to make a pond, and you know, very precise instructions on how to do everything. But in your more or less autobiographical book, The Bumblebee Flies Anyway, which, by the way, if anyone hasn't read it, homework, you really must read this book. It's gorgeous. Kate writes exquisitely, absolutely exquisitely, and I don't say that lightly. And you say in the books, this is when you're making your pond in your little garden in Brighton. In the books, there are various instructions on how to dig a pond, starting with marking out the shape before you start. These are the very instructions you give in your new book. And then you say, none of them says start digging and see what happens, but that's what I do. The revolution is sort of potato shaped. The important thing is to get stuck in.
It is. And also, in my defence, it was such a tiny garden. And yeah, I did just dig a pond on a whim one afternoon. I wasn't going to, and then I just thought, oh, do you know what? I really want a pond. So yeah, I didn't mark it out, but it was a lovely little pond. and I've got dragonflies breeding in it. So maybe the future is potato shaped, because it worked.
Yes, excellent. And that's the message, really, isn't it? That yes, there are all sorts of wonderful instructions, and I really encourage people not only to buy your lovely The Bumblebee Flies Anyway, which is a very touching and beautifully written book, but also your very practical How to Create a Garden Pond, a Wildlife Pond, I'm sorry, both of which can be purchased through the link that David has put in the chat. But on to gardens in general and your mission to make us all into wildlife gardeners. And I want to quote you a few things, please, from The Bumblebee Flies Anyway. When you're talking about your little garden in Brighton, which is really, it's more than a garden, it's a soul place, it's a healing place, and the book is very much about that. You say, I imagine the gardens all along my road, all linked together, all designed as mine, all wild, each one full of house sparrows, bees, each one with a bee block housing tiny solitary wasps, a pond with dragonfly larvae, a compost heap with centipedes and rove beetles, a fruit tree in every plot would make an orchard, enough for us to share with neighbours and birds, a long hedge at the back would make a route, a corridor that small mammals and amphibians could travel along. Imagine how many birds would nest in the hedge that replaced fence panels all the way from one end of the road to another, each garden home to a dunnock and a blackbird that would serenade every last one of us each morning. This is really your vision, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Wouldn't that just be amazing? I'd love it. I'd absolutely love it. We'd have so much wildlife in our towns and cities.
We would. So tell us again, you say 220 million gardens in the UK, and the vast majority are still buying peat grown plants treated with toxic chemicals from the garden centre, instead of this wonderful give and take swapping of plants, allotment style gardening where we share and we create a communal something which is great for us and our sense of community, but also great for the wildlife we live alongside.
Yes, we've got a long way to go. I mean, of those 22 million gardens, you know, most of them have very short lawns, some of them are paved, some of them are decked, some of them have plastic grass. We seem to be sort of gradually chipping away at this last refuge that we have, which breaks my heart, really. But you know, we've got to be positive and think about all the good things we can do. And the more of us that shout about it, talk about it, chat with our neighbours, swap seeds, share plants, invite their kids around to come and look at frogs, then the more we can engage with our neighbours and try and turn this around. I mean, I've always lived in cities where habitats are already quite compromised, and living space is compromised. So, you know, I've sort of grown up seeing gardens carved up when houses are converted into flats, and you know, huge extensions put on the back of buildings, which blocks out light, which then kills the grass, so that then they pave everything over. And you know, I'm just faced with this every day, as I sort of, you know, walk to and from the allotment, or, you know, go to the shops or whatever. I'm faced with sort of daily destruction, and yeah, we should do more. We should do more to. If 220 million people planted a tree in their garden tomorrow, I mean, it'd be amazing. If we got rid of every fence panel in the country and replaced it with some native hedging, I mean, it would just be so wonderful. We wouldn't be able to sleep from about 3 o'clock in the morning, would we, with all the birds singing? Yeah, be lovely.
I do feel I need to say, in case the president of the Fence Panel Association of the UK is watching, we're not per se anti-fence panels. We just believe that hedges and trees are far, far better habitat for wildlife. And of course, there's a deep landscape reason for this, that we are, since the retreat of the last glaciation about 12,000 years ago, we are a land in which we've always been woodland and woodland edge. There's always been a mixture of both man-made but also natural pasture against the edges of woodland. And gardens are a wonderful surrogate for that. And the very species that live in the edges of woods, many of our butterflies, and of course many of our most charismatic birds, the ones we love, the blackbirds, the dunnocks, the great tits, the blue tits, etc., the song thrushes, they're species of woodland edge, and they do well in gardens. And so it's morally incumbent on us to provide them this habitat. But this is your mission. This is your mission in life.
It is my mission. It is. So yes, and I'm sure talking to Norfolk Wildlife Trust, I'm preaching to the converted. Really, it's our plastic grass loving neighbours that we need to reach out to. And I do actually invite my neighbours' children to come around and look at frogs, because that seems to me to be the most engaging way to make them think about why there aren't any frogs in their own gardens, because their kids love the frogs. On the allotment, all the kids come and look in my pond, and I've taught them all to sort of kneel around the pond and have a look at the tadpoles, and I think that's really important. But I think, as depressing as I find the continual destruction of urban habitats for wildlife, I think an infectious enthusiasm for wildlife is the best way to engage people. And just as well, I think it's probably engaging a bit of FOMO. I mean, I think a lot of my friends are quite jealous that I've got all this stuff going on in my garden and they haven't, because it's just a constant distraction from the, really boring and miserable things of everyday life, really. I get to look at bees in my bee hotel. I get to look at toads. I've got hedgehogs. I've got a female hedgehog at the moment using my hedgehog box, and I'm just really hoping that a male comes in and she has babies in my hedgehog box. So every day I run down and I get my videos of my trail cams to see if I've seen any males popping in to say hello to the female. So yeah, I just live my life for what's going on in my garden, and hope that others might try and do the same. I don't know. Hopefully.
You, if ever there were a prophet to convince people, then it is you, Kate Bradbury, it is you. Now, Piers, hello Piers, we also know each other, rightly points out, it was me that introduced the 220 number, I'm very sorry. It's 22 million gardens in the UK, isn't it? I said, yeah, and Piers is rightly pointing out that I'm getting, in my defence, Piers, I've been away from home for 5 weeks and I'm sitting in a hotel and my brain isn't firing on, but that's entirely my bad, not Kate's. It was 22 million gardens. Thank you very much for flagging that. Now, there's a flip side. And this comes across very strongly in all your work, in your presenting work, but also in your writing, and particularly in The Bumblebee Flies Anyway, which, as I have said before, is absolutely beautiful and everybody should read it. That our gardens are more than a place where wildlife lives. They are a place where we live, and they're a place where we root. And then you go back through a number of gardens. You talk about the garden in which you grew up. Of all the gardens I've loved and lost, this one holds a piece of me. This with my DNA from cut hair and skin from scabbed knees, dust of feathers collected off mud pies, buried pet rabbits. We're in the soil and the leaves, the birds, the bees, little pieces of them and me. This garden is still mine, a place where you've left a part of you, but it's made a part of you too. But to go back to the garden that you create in Brighton during the book, only I know where the sun shines. Only I know the spot where it hits the back of the fence in the last week of February after months of darkness, the patches it lights up as it reflects across windows, the plants it streaks over in the course of the day, the year. Only I know the wet bits, the dry bits, the good soil, the bad soil, the plants, the plants, the plants. Just lovely. But a garden is a place we grow too.
Yes. It is, and you're reading these things out. You're really making me miss the garden, Nick, because I'm not there anymore.
But you've created another beautiful. You've gifted that garden to someone else.
Yes, I have. And she loves it actually. She emails me sometimes and sends me pictures. Yeah, the garden. Yeah, I mean, gardens have always held a really significant thing for me. They've always had a part of my soul. I've always been very, very connected. So the garden I grew up in, I was very lucky. It was quite a big garden. It was sort of nearly half an acre, sort of in the outskirts of Birmingham. And it was just my wild patch. I mean, you know, I grew up in the outskirts of Birmingham. We didn't really get to see the countryside. We didn't, you know, we were the kids that went to school trips to farms to see a bit of countryside and be introduced to cows and things. It was all very, you know, get the city kids out for the weekend. So the garden was my nature. It was my everything. It was my outdoors. It was my introduction to loads of things. And we had a tip box, and we had worms, and we had, you know, we made mud pies, and we just sort of bombed around, really. Got stung by nettles. Dad grew veggies at the back, yeah, it was just wonderful. It was just a really, really special place. And then, you know, my parents divorced, and you know, we had to leave. And the garden was, yeah, losing that garden was really quite significant. And I think I've always sort of wanted to re-engage with land like I did as a child, and recreate that feeling of home, really, in an outside space. And I've been in this garden now for 2 years, and you know, as people might have seen on Springwatch, I, you know, completely gutted it and then replanted it. So it's kind of quite a new garden, but it's starting to look more established now. And I've got my frog spawn, I've got my dragonfly larvae, I've got my hedgehogs, and it's home. It's lovely, and yeah, I don't really ever want to be anywhere else. If I'm somewhere else, it's on the allotment, which I've had for 4.5 years. And again, you know, those roots, I'm just really tentatively just letting those roots just dig in. And yeah, it's good. What do I get on the allotment? I get loads of slow worms on the allotment, like hundreds of slow worms. Every time I lift the compost bin, there's like 20 slow worms. So that's nice. I do get slow worms here, but not as many. And yes,
I dream.
Hey?
I dream of slow worms in my.
Oh,
I dream of slow worms, but I have all sorts of. I live on a flyway of migratory birds, and so I see all kinds of ridiculous things from my garden.
Yeah. Do you get turtle doves?
Do you know, I've never seen turtle dove from I did in my childhood garden, which is 2 miles away, but turtle dove has declined enormously. I used, when I first moved to my house, to be able to walk out and hear nightingale, which I no longer can because it has gone from North Norfolk, but I still have 10 species of warbler that I can hear from my house, 10 species of warbler, which is very, very lucky. And the past couple of springs also, and this really is, I'm not trying to have a garden off here, but one of the reintroduction program corncrakes I can hear from. I know.
Wow.
I know. I'm very, very, very lucky. I keep making my garden wilder and wilder in the hope that my tiny garden gets a corncrake. This is, state your goals, people. State your goals. You know, you just aim high. What would you say? Now, you've waxed about your own childhood garden and the gardens that have been yours and you've made special, and in one case you've passed on. What would you say to someone who is just tentatively beginning their garden journey, who thinks they might be a wildlife gardener but is afraid,
don't be afraid. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. What would you say to someone who has never gardened but who wants to create a place where wildlife lives and they themselves can do some living?
I would say get a chair or a bench, or make yourself a nice little place where you can sit, and that can be your special place. And so the first thing to do is you plant yourself in the garden, and so from there you will be able to, everything else will grow. So if you plonk yourself in this rooted position in the garden, then you can hang some bird feeders that aren't too close to where you're sitting, because the birds will never come, but so that you can see them from where you're sitting. And so you've got this eye line of things coming in, and you can see the birds coming in, and then you'll think, well, what's that bird? And then you can identify the bird, and then you can go and read the books and find out what that bird likes, and then you can buy some plants that the bird likes. And that's what I sort of do, or how I started really. I built on things. I found species and I got really excited about them. It all started with bumblebees with me. So I found a bumblebee nest and I had to move it, and it was a very long story, but I got really obsessed with bumblebees because I was determined that we must save them, all of them. And so I just read all the books on bumblebees. I'm actually sitting below my bumblebee shelf, which is about that long now. I've got all the bumblebee books, and I just devoured this information about how to provide food and habitats for bumblebees. So I just started growing all of the plants, and it's quite easy once you know. There's so many resources to hand that once you're fixed on something, you can do it. Don't worry about planting. It's really easy. If you've never planted anything before, you just stick it into the ground. You make sure the root ball isn't sitting proud of the soil. You water it in well. If it says on the label, give it sun, make sure it has some sun. If it says partial shade, make sure it has partial shade. Not many things like full shade. So if you've got a north facing wall or whatever, then you need to grow some woodlandy plants. And you can, there's whole websites, pages of woodland plants that you can buy. But you know, for your sunny side, for your bee side, you can fill it with all sorts of things: lavenders, catmints, poppies, buddleias, everything, anything. There's so much. And then, you know, once you've planted these flowers and you've seen the bees coming on, or you've seen the birds coming on, you know, you can extend the season. You can say, well, I'm going to have something in flower between March and November. So then you research and you find out how can you extend that season? What's going to be in flower really early in the year, and what's going to take you through to right at the end of the year. So you're providing this constant source of nectar and pollen. And then while you're doing that, once you've got the bees in, then you can look at the butterflies, and you can grow the caterpillar food plants, so that the butterflies that you see coming in to drink the nectar also have the opportunity to lay eggs, and the moths too, that you might not see during the day, but are sort of very much there at night. And it grows and grows and grows. And the more caterpillars you have, the more birds you have. You dig a pond, and then suddenly that centers everything. My garden, my bumblebee garden, the sparrows didn't start coming in until I dug the pond. And that was just a real win moment for me. It's like, how do I get them in? How do I get them in? And then I put the pond in, and suddenly they were just all over it, because it was the only source of water in, apart from gutters, probably for miles, because it was so urban. And yeah, and just make sure you keep sitting in that little place where you've rooted yourself, and just observe and enjoy it. And it will just come naturally. That's
I think it's good advice to plant yourself in the garden. That is absolutely the way my garden works. I have a bench that belonged to my best friend, died a few years ago, and the bench belonged to her. And I have it and I sit on it, and it is, I've never thought of it, but it's my rooted place. And down to the left of me where I sit, it's my desk whenever it's warm enough. I sit in the garden and work with my laptop on my knee. And to the left of me, there's a little pond, and there's a flint in the pond, and my little Helophilus pendulus hoverfly, the little, the stripy one that they call the footballer, sits on there. And then there's a big stand of red valerian either side of me, and my hummingbird hawk moths come in and out, and they weave around me. And then just ahead of me, there's catmint, and my bumblebees are going in and out the whole time, and they're my team. Yeah. And then over there, my sight line just over there, there's one of my bee blocks, and my willoughbys, leafcutter bees go in and out the whole time. And then they've got sharp-tailed bees that go in and out after them. And you know, so my garden is, but it's exactly what you say, you root yourself in a garden. And that's really the value of it, isn't it? That it's a place where you can grow, where you can ground, where you can feel safe and feel that you've got this special place that means more to you, that only means that to you, that is this special place where you're rooted.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And you know, wildlife gardening is so worthy, and it's so important, and there's so many brilliant things you can do. But yeah, don't ever lose sight of the fact that it's really good for you as well. It's one of the most important things you can do for yourself as well, because it's a gift. It's a gift Being able to play with your bee hotels all day is a gift. Counting frogs born is a gift. It's just lovely.
You do go to fairly extreme lengths with your bee hotels and your baby bees. Last month, I spoke to the wonderful Dave Goulson, who takes much more of a laissez-faire attitude.
Oh, he doesn't do anything to his, does he?
No, he doesn't. No, it's the battle of the bee hotels. It's the oh yeah, I let my bees get on with it, and the nurturing each cocoon. There are different philosophies in bee nurturing, which is wonderful. But we have a question, an anonymous question here, so I'll read it out. Any thoughts about cats near ponds? Now, this is a tricky issue. Our garden has well-travelled tracks running through, established by numerous neighbouring cats. Is there any need or way to discourage these visitors? Or will we find the answer in the book? You won't find the answer in the pond book. I don't know if you touch on cats in the wildlife gardening book.
No, I mean, I do a bit, but I think the thing with cats is that it's quite a contentious subject, and a lot of people really love cats and a lot of people really hate cats, and I just sort of chicken out of getting involved, really, because I love cats, but I'm also very, very aware of the damage they can cause. Yeah, in spring, when I was putting the camera traps around my pond and I was watching all of the lovely frog legs just all sort of waving in the night as they were getting up to all sorts in the pond, the local neighbourhood cats would come in and try and scoop them out. So yeah, cats, we know cats are a worry. Cats eat birds, a lot of them. They eat small mammals. I don't know if they eat frogs or if they just play with them. But, you know, I would love it if all cats had a bell on their collars, but obviously with neighbouring cats, there's not much you can do about that. I've just got a dog, actually, which is the best thing I've done for my garden in terms of cats, because every time a cat comes into the garden, she goes crazy and chases it out. So, yeah, I don't know, get a dog. Yeah, I mean, I just think, I would like to live in a world where cat owners were more just thought more about the wildlife. You know, I have had cats in the past and they've always worn a bell, but they hated wearing the bell, and I do appreciate that a lot of people don't want to put bells on their cats. And the cat also really liked waking us up in the night because she knew that she could ring her own bell, which was quite frustrating. But yeah, I think the best advice with cats and wildlife, especially for frog pond life, is to create hiding places in the garden. So you've got your pond, and then next to your pond, if you have a log pile or a stone cairn or something like that, and a compost heap, if all got in quite close proximity, then those frogs, when they leave the pond, again, if you have lots of sort of low-growing herbage around the pond, if you've got long grass, if you've got things, I'll grow bird's foot trefoil. I've got like curtains of bird's foot trefoil that just sort of hang over the edge of my pond. So there's loads of hiding places, and so the cats can't actually see the jumping. You know, and I've got a meadow as well, so the grass is long. So I think cats are quite attracted to things when they sort of jump and move around. So the more refuge you can provide for those things that jump and are quite attracted to cats, then I think the better. But otherwise, I don't know what to suggest, really. I'd say hiding places is the way forward.
That's as good as you're going to get. It's very, very, very tricky to keep other cats out of your garden, unfortunately. Kate, I want to ask you about your philosophy, really. So beyond the fact that we can do a great deal of good for wildlife in our gardens and why it's so important, and beyond the fact that it's terribly good for us, there's a bigger vision to do good across the landscape, and this comes across in your lovely The Bumblebee Flies anyway. If I can read a couple of bits to you. There's something about this desert and its doomed house sparrows that draws me to it. I want to unbutton the earth, let life back in. I wonder if I could save the sparrows, or at least create a stepping stone from one distant tree to the next. When did a butterfly last land here? When did hedgehogs last roam? Can I restore this corner of earth, this patch of emptiness? Perhaps we can fix each other. I get chills reading that. I bet you do. And then later on, more optimistically, what are we doing to our land? I think of everything I've achieved in the postage stamp garden I brought back from beneath paving stones. That could be any patch of land, anywhere. There could be a network of native shrubs and trees, long grass, wildflowers in gardens and balconies up and down the country. Some of our wildlife could survive here. It's not too late. You're a prophet, aren't you, Kate Bradbury?
No, I'm not a prophet. I'm very passionate about turning things around. I don't know. As I said earlier, I've always lived in cities, and it just drives me around the bend where we just concrete over everything. And you know, so many of our species are dying, and I know that concreting over everything isn't the only problem. Lots of species would still be declining if we took away that concrete. But I just think it's really bad for our mental health as well. I mean, I'm just always so much happier when I've got trees and greenery around me and birds singing and all of these, you know, wonderful things, and they make me really happy. And then I just go somewhere that's just a bit sort of downtrodden and there's no trees. There's, you know, it's just sad. It's sad and it's quiet from a nature perspective, not quiet from a sort of traffic and, you know, police siren sort of perspective. And yeah, I want to live in a world where everything is beautiful, and everything is beautiful because it's covered in plants, because we let ivy grow up our walls into our roofs, and we don't care about falling roof tiles, and then a bat comes and sleeps in there, and you know, a swift has babies. Like I want to live in a world that is just clothed in plants and wildlife and love. And yeah, I think that would be nice.
It would be. It's almost as if we evolved to function best in a landscape that was, I know, go figure. There's also a slightly radical side to you. There's an image in The Bumblebee Flies Anyway, where you stuff the seeds of native plants into your pockets.
Oh, I do, don't I?
And then you run around Brighton sprinkling them in carefully chosen places. There's a radical side, isn't there? There's a rewilding ninja in you somewhere, isn't there?
There is slightly, yes. Yeah, it was hawthorn. It was locally, and before anyone gets cross about guerrilla gardening of non-native species, or but it was locally sourced hawthorn that I was doing that with, and I scarified it and everything, and then I put it in my running pocket, and when I went running around in the evening, I just used to chuck a few seeds in, and it was the sort of places where there's garden management, but not significant amounts, so it's just sort of gets a general trim. So, you know, a little hawthorn shrub just sort of cropping up at the back wouldn't be noticed really until it was useful, and then it'd be too late to grub it out. Then it'd just be part of the landscape and would just be trimmed with everything else, with all of the escallonia and those things that have smelly flowers in winter. What are they called? Sarcococca confusa. Yes. So yeah, I have done that. I just want them to be more caterpillars. I want them to be more caterpillars and more moths and more baby birds. I just think that would be really lovely.
That is a noble aim, and it's very important. I mentioned earlier that I've been rewilding the duck pond in my village with yellow flag iris and hemp agramine and water mint and things. They are all locally sourced, wild sourced, not dug up from the wild, but from patches of land where the landowner gave me permission to move some plants from a half a mile away. And this is really, really important if you are gardening for wildlife. Of course, if your friend down the allotment gives you a bit of a lovely domestic geranium that's really great for bees, bung it in your garden, that's brilliant. But if you're managing a nature reserve, it's really important not to buy stuff from a garden centre that might not really be what it purports to be. And there will be someone who manages a pond nearby who's got little bits of yellow flag iris or water mint or whatever it is that you want that really are the real deal and are what our wildlife has evolved to live alongside, and that's terribly, terribly important.
Exactly. I do get quite frustrated when I see very, very well-intentioned and well-meaning people on Twitter sort of having just bought some seeds of you know, cornfield annuals, and then they're scattering them in the hedgerows, and I'm like, no. Yes, local provenance is key, and yes, we must tread gently on that one. I think it's important to go and have sort of slightly sort of renegade planting missions, but we need to do it carefully, thoughtfully.
A little bit of thought and research first, and making sure that it's really what's appropriate for the place, and you have that knowledge in spades. Well, Kate, I'm aware that you have to rush off this evening. You've got an important mission with the BBC. All will be revealed.
All be revealed on Radio 2's Zoe Ball's breakfast show tomorrow morning.
How exciting.
It's very exciting. Yes.
Very exciting indeed, my goodness me. Well, we don't want to keep you up for too long, given that you've got Zoe Ball tomorrow morning, my goodness. Doubly grateful to you for having shared your evening with us this evening, therefore. Thank you to everyone who has attended. Thank you for all of your questions. Please do follow the links that David has put in the chat, where you can buy not just Kate's Pond book, but her previous books as well. And by so doing, you will make a donation to Norfolk Wildlife Trust, and we're extremely grateful. And if anyone is feeling enormously flush, if anyone's just won the pools or the lottery or whatever, and feels that they would love to help us purchase more land for wildlife and for converting back to wildlife habitat, there is the option also to make a donation through the link that David's popped in the chat as well. An enormous thanks to all of you. Please do check out cleycalling.com, which is the website devoted to our Cley Calling events. And as I say, from the 15th to the 18th of July, we have a whole exciting series of events, all about this time staying local and appreciating the wildlife that we have on our doorsteps, be it in our gardens or our local parks or our local nature reserve. But it's all about treading lightly on our local patches and not needing to go further afield, because as Kate has shown us, there is so much just right out there outside waiting for us to discover and enhance and nurture. Kate Bradbury, thank you very, very much indeed for having shared your Thursday evening with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you for reminding me that I wrote a book about my garden. I might even read Bumblebee myself again, so thank you for that.
It's a beautiful book, and I encourage everybody attending to read it. And as I say, you can purchase it through the link, in addition to Kate's wonderful Pond book. Thank you all very much for being with us. We look forward to hosting you again in July with our online events and our real world events at our Clive Visitor Centre, where we're open for business, and we're delighted to have you. Thanks all. Until then, stay safe. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you and good night.
Thanks, Nick.